video is going to stay up. There we
go. Do we have?
I'm still here.
Coming in? How's the weather?
It's hot, it's humid, it's sticky, feels like home, the Amazon.
There you go. All right, we're going to wait just a bit to make sure that people can get in.
There we go.
Do you see? I see them. Oh, are they still loading? Yep. Let's give it a little bit more so people have time to sign in. Still trickling.
Well, while we're all waiting, I might just take a moment to let folks know what the seminar is about. This is really an analysis of how the Amazon came to be, why it has so much aquatic biodiversity, and all about the different fishes that we pursue there. So that's what we're going to hear tonight when you all have a chance to get logged in.
And, okay. Well, we'll get started and see if the participants, oh, there goes a couple more. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Fly Fishing Around the World, Fierce Fishes of the Amazon with Dr. Paul Reiss. I'm Sandy Carpenter. I'm your moderator and host tonight. I'm the Vice Chair of Fly Fishers International Women Connect, and this is the first of many programs that we're hoping will be sponsored by Women's Connect. Be sure to check out our Facebook page, FFI Women Connect, for updates. I also would like to thank all the members and the organization of Fly Fishers International to make these weekly webinars possible. A couple of housekeeping things we need to talk about. You will be on mute, so if you have a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the page, and we may interrupt Paul for the questions, or we may hold the questions to the end of the lecture. Also, change your viewing screen on the top right. If it's in gallery view, change it to speaker view so you'll be able to see the slides and Paul while he's talking. At the end of the program, we have a really short poll that we'd like you to fill out, and it will be anonymous. I had the fortunate opportunity 3 years ago to take a fly fishing trip with Paul on the Amazon, and it was the trip of a lifetime, and I highly recommend it as a bucket list destination. Now let me tell you a few things about Dr. Reiss. He has a PhD in neotropical ichthyology, which is South American fish. He is recognized as one of the world's foremost experts in Cichla temensis. Did I say it right? Cichla temensis.
Perfect.
We practiced that. Thank you. That means the giant peacock bass. With over 2 decades of scientific research and hands-on jungle fishing experience under his belt, he owns and operates Acute Angling, one of the Amazon's premier providers of fishing trips for peacock bass and exotic Amazon game fish species. Dr. Reiss's scientific work has led to the discovery of previously unknown aspects of the life cycles of Amazon fishes. He has published a series of peer-reviewed scientific papers on the subject. His efforts include leading ongoing joint research projects in pristine protected areas that continue to yield critically valuable new information and have resulted in a new acceptance of sports fishing as a conservation tool in the Amazon. The fulfillment of what began as a childhood dream has yielded the potential of helping to protect and fulfill the dreams of anglers and conservationists everywhere. Now we'll start with a short video to whet your appetite.
Cyril, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
He knows every stone and every bend in this river, and he can certainly put you in front of it.
Oh, that's a big meal. Giant trailer. Wait, these fish are brutes. Yes. Push on. Big. Oh. Yep. Oh my gosh. Have you ever seen a freshwater fish run like that? Giant 3-bar peacock. Oh my. Pira rara, red-tailed catfish. Beautiful animal. Here we go. 6 feet long and about 180 pounds. That's the Amazon right there. Muito obrigado, amigo. Muito obrigado.
Well, that was Cyril Choquet, the star of that video. And Cyril happens to be a really polished fly fisherman, but I noticed throughout that entire video, he used conventional tackle. But I will assure you that except for the catfish, Cyril has caught them all on the fly as well. Let me get my screen set up, and I'm hoping, Sandy, that we see my presentation.
Yep.
Okay, so let me take a moment to tell you a little bit about the presentation and myself. My name is Paul Reiss. I've been researching and operating a sport fishing operation in the Amazon for the last 25 years, going on 26 now. I found the Amazon when I first got down there to be a puzzle that I really couldn't explain. I couldn't explain how the hydrology worked. I couldn't explain why the fish behaved the way they did. So I've spent the past 25 years taking advantage of my ability to go to these places and the resources that I had there as a sport fishing operation to perform the research. And that has sort of given me a real balance and allowed me to take advantage of the synergy between the two functions. In my mind, knowledge is power, and anglers, the smarter they are, the more they know about their quarry, the better able they are to actually succeed. So I'm not going to try to cram 3 hours worth of information about the Amazon into one talk. So tonight we're going to talk about how the Amazon came to be and about the unique biodiversity and the real interesting array of fishes found there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start walking through this seminar, if I can do all the right things on my computer. And maybe I can't. Yes, I
That looks good.
Okay, good. Okay, so you've been seeing this screen for a while. And I think I have to do something to make this live. I'm sorry about that. I'm a pretty good fisherman, but not so great a computer man. Okay, how are we doing? Can you see my screen?
No.
No. Okay, well, I'm working on it. How's that?
There you go.
You got it there?
Okay.
And
All righty. So let me see if I can. No, it won't. I need to figure out how to change my slide. I'm used to different software, folks, and I'm used to doing this in person. And I'm going to try and set it up again. Okay, I think we're good.
Yay.
Okay, let me get out of that screen. That's better.
There we go.
All righty. So the Amazon, big place, roughly the size of the continental United States. It has the greatest aquatic biodiversity on the planet. And there are a number of reasons, and they're challenging and interesting reasons. And that's what I'd like to walk through with you this evening. The big question, why so much biodiversity? There's a number of answers, or a number of categories of answers that we can address. And biogeographical vicariance is kind of a big word, but it basically means accidents of history. Limnology and microhabitats. Limnology is the study of fresh water. The flood pulse ecology is a unique characteristic of the Amazon, which we'll spend a little time on. And convergence and radiation are aspects of evolution that have impacted the growth of and the speciation in the Amazon. So when we talk about the Amazon, we talk about a number of different things. We talk about the basin, and that's what we typically mean, and that's the region drained by the Amazon River system. It's got over 1,000 named tributaries. And when I call it a named tributary, it means a river that we as temperate zone dwellers would be familiar with. The Ohio, the Columbia, the Hudson. These tributaries are big rivers. It's the world's largest river with the greatest volume of water, between 7 and 20 times the output of the Mississippi. And it's also the world's longest river, about 150 miles longer than the Nile. It drains half of South America. And I am so used to doing these seminars in person that some of the things I like to say don't get much of a reaction in a webinar, but I love having a room full of Texans and saying that the Amazon basin is 10 times bigger than Texas. Don't get offended if you're from Texas, but it's roughly the size of the continental US. It has 7 tributaries that are more than 1,000 miles long. So to put that into perspective, the Rio Negro, one of the Amazon's tributaries, is also one of the 10 biggest rivers in the world. 5 of its tributaries are bigger than the Mississippi, and it's navigable for thousands of miles. And that's not just from the headwaters to the mouth, but because of its unique structure, because of the dendritic pattern of its tributaries, you can put a boat in the water in Bolivia, put it in the Secure River, take it to the Madre de Dios, into the Mamore, the Guapore, into the Madeira, from the Madeira into the main stem of the Amazon, take that up to the Rio Negro, into the Cassiquiare in Venezuela, from there into the Orinoco, and out the mouth of the Orinoco into the Caribbean. That's almost 4,000 miles from south to north in a river that flows from east to west. So it's not just a simple river system that runs from one end to the other. It's essentially almost an inland ocean. It contains more than 20% of the world's fresh water. And at this time in our geohistory, about half of our water is still frozen in ice caps and glaciers. So it's 40% of the world's liquid fresh water. It is such a powerful outflow into the ocean that it creates a slick of fresh water that aquatic animals to the north of it, marine animals, cannot cross. And so there's actually a different population of fishes to the north and south of its output. It's a continental drainage. It's the major drainage of 6 countries and partial drainage in several others. And it's in an area, again, the size of the continental US, with a population of about 4.5 million, 2.5 million of them in the city of Manaus. So there's not a lot of people to run into when we're fishing in the Amazon. $250 million years ago, on our planet, all of the tectonic plates were in one landmass called Pangaea. And this part of the thing is a little bit dizzying, so I'll go to a still version of it. And about 250 million years ago was also the beginning of the evolution of vertebrate life. And of course, fishes being the first vertebrates. When this Pangaea, this one continent, began to separate, it separated into 2 continents. One, the southern continent known as Gondwanaland, and the northern continent, Laurasia. And when that happened, we separated the development and the evolution of fishes from early in their evolution. So over time, about 200 million years ago, Gondwanaland was its own single continent, and it began to separate, forming Africa, South America, Australia, India, and the Antarctic. And the fishes that separated had already evolved and differentiated themselves from the northern continents. Gondwanaland was a theory until about 25 years ago, when it was pretty consistently proved by the fact that there are literally rock formations that run through these continents, and that fishes, in particular cichlids, for example, are found naturally in all the Gondwanaland continents and in none of the Laurasian continents. When South America separated from Gondwanaland, it consisted of 2 plates, the Guyana Shield and the Brazil Shield. And what we know as the Amazon today was literally a bay of the Pacific Ocean. And to explain that a little better, I think the best way is to use a little cartoon. So if we look at the brown areas, they represent those tectonic plates, the highlands. The lowlands, as South America began to rise from the ocean, were basically sedimentary materials. And to the left of the cartoon is a bay of the Pacific Ocean that most of South America's rivers drained into. And that was the case until about 65 million years ago, when the Andes began to rise because of the subduction of the Pacific plates. They literally forced their way under the South American plates and began to raise up a chain of mountains. And over millions of years, the Andes ultimately rose to close that bay off completely from the ocean. So here's one of the first things that contributed to the unusual aquatic biodiversity of the Amazon. All of those animals, all of those saltwater animals that were living in a bay of the Pacific Ocean suddenly found themselves in a freshwater lake, because over time, as the drainage from the rivers entered what was previously this bay and now closed off, it lost its salt water and was replaced by freshwater. So being a species of fish or even an animal like the infamous or famous Amazon dolphins, you had two choices. You became extinct, or you figured out how to survive in a freshwater environment. These animals acclimatized and evolved into freshwater animals. So in the Amazon today, we have sardines, we have drum, we have stingrays, and of course we have dolphin, a lot of animals that are not found in freshwater. About 10 million years ago, the Andes completed their rise, essentially closing off all of Western South America. And Lake Pebas, the remnant of the Pacific Bay, disappeared. It began to become filled, and water, as you know, always finds a way to get to its lowest point. So over time, it carved what we call the Atlantic Canyon from Lake Pebas out to the Atlantic. So all these rivers that were previously draining into the Pacific were now draining into a main stem that turned around, and instead of going from east to west, flowed from west to east. Maybe you can start to see a little bit of the complexity that this has created. Two arches rose, the Vaupace Arch and the Michicola Arch in the north and south, breaking what was a single drainage into the Orinoco Basin, the Amazon Basin, and the Paraguay Basin. So that's what it looks like today. That central Amazon Basin, which is where we fish, is what previously was a bay of the Pacific Ocean. What further contributed to the biodiversity was the rising and falling of oceans. Over the last millennia, we've had hot spells and cold spells. We've had ice ages and we've had tropical ages where sea levels rose and fell over 100 feet. And again, as we know, water finds its way to its lowest point. So when that occurred, the Amazon carved a channel out to the lowest point of sea level, and now it has a channel over 100 feet deep that ranges from more than 2,000 miles inland out to the ocean. It also did the opposite. It flooded from saltwater into freshwater, bringing secondary freshwater animals in, such as the cichlids. These are contributing factors to that biodiversity, and all of these are things we characterize as biogeographical vicariance. So to get a little further into this, limnology and geology. Limnology is another fancy word. It simply means the study of fresh waters. The Amazon is a flood pulse system, very different from what we as temperate zone dwellers know. It has a very different type of trophic system. It has complex habitats, and it changes constantly. So to give you some examples of that, there are two river theories. There's the river continuum concept, and that explains our North American rivers. They essentially run from the headwaters to the mouth with increased complexity and increased food chain complexity as they broaden. As tributaries flow into, and I have a little pointer here, I guess I need to learn how to use that. Let's use the laser pointer. So as a river flows, a temperate zone river flows from the headwaters to the mouth, very simple bacterial components make up the food chain. As light begins to hit the water, we get primary production, algae. Zooplankton feeds off algae, small fishes off zooplankton, and of course, bigger fishes off of smaller fishes. So the food chain runs from the headwaters to the mouth. The difference in a flood pulse system, and there aren't a lot of them, and they all tend to be tropical, but the Amazon is sort of the prototype, if you would. The Amazon drains out of the Andes Mountains, new mountains, and it carries suspended sediment, and that suspended sediment contains elemental nutrient, phosphorus and nitrogen. And that leaves the mountains and moves into the basin, the lowlands basin, where flow, because the river has such a low gradient, flow dramatically stops. The flood pulse, which we'll explain as we go along, tends to cause these rivers to flood for a significant period of the year. And water from the main stem moves into floodplain remnants, lakes, oxbows, creeks, and other isolated type of structure. So here, because nutrient moves from the river, from the main river into the floodplain, our trophic flow is from the floodplain to the river. Very different, creating a huge amount of different habitat types, and very different from what we know of. I guess I need to turn off that laser, as in temperate zones. This complex basin also has very varied types of water. And they all have names that don't describe them well. Whitewater regions are parts of the system that contain water coming from the Andes, and it's not white at all. It's pretty much the color of coffee with milk in it. And it's not called whitewater because it's fast. It's very slow moving lowland systems. Blackwater regions, which are the regions where all of our fishing takes place, blackwater regions are heavily tannin stained, and they have an extremely low pH in contrast to whitewater. The pH is so low that for those of you who think you might ever want to go to the Amazon, the good news is the pH is so low that mosquito larvae cannot reproduce in these waters. So there are no mosquitoes in the regions we fish, just as a little bit of an aside. And finally, blue water regions, they're not blue either, they're essentially clear, and they are waters that tend to drain out of the shields, which are older mountains and give off very little sediment. So, as I indicated, the central part of this basin outside of the shields is based on sedimentary substrate, sand to the north and oligotrophic clay to the south. And water, moving water, carves on the inside of a curve, deposits on the outside of a curve. So if I can get my little laser pointer, as these rivers carry material from the inside of a curve and deposit them on the outside, over time, we cut away that curve and form oxbow lakes. We form levee lakes, also known as dike lakes, and these produce yet more types of habitat. A satellite photo can give you a good picture of an oxbow. You can even see the difference in color in that lake from the main stem of the river. Dike lakes are caused by the pushing of sediment, and they are connected almost always by small channels to the main river. And finally, rhea lakes are essentially small tributaries or creeks called igarapés that during the dry season become disconnected from the main river. And again, you can see that color differential. So we've got a lot of freshwater characteristics that help to differentiate this system and to create some of this biodiversity. We also have a pulsative ecology. This river rises less than a centimeter per kilometer. So the city of Manaus, for example, being over 1,000 miles from the ocean, is less than 100 feet above sea level, the river itself. Not a lot of gradient, not a lot of movement in the water You literally have to throw a leaf on the surface and wait a while to see which way it flows in some circumstances to have an idea of whether you're going upriver or downriver. And this is caused by a cyclical rainfall. The complex geology of this system and its palmate structure allows it to cause damming effects from its tributaries. What does that mean? It doesn't mean we've made those tributaries go to Hades. It means we've used those tributaries to control the way water rises and falls in its effluents. So rainfall, because we sit south of the equator in the Amazon, let's see if I can get my little laser pointer. Equator runs roughly across the top of the basin. And because we're south of it, Coriolis forces, or the forces that drive weather, are reversed. So weather moves counterclockwise. And in the region that we fish, which is kind of here in this little niche of the basin, and I'll show you that in the next slide. No, I won't. That's one that shows rainfall, but here we go. In this region, that rainfall moves from the south to the north. So our fishing seasons follow it. All of our fishing operations are mobile, well, all except for one. And they all position themselves so that they are in the optimal part of the dry season for maximum productivity in fishing. And that pulsative ecology raises and lowers the Amazon's water levels to an extent that we just aren't familiar with here. Water levels will rise from 30 to 50 feet, depending on where you are. Manaus has a rise of over 55 feet. These pictures perhaps give you a little example. There's a log up here in the top of this tree standing in the water, 36 feet above the surface of the water. And of course, we're in the dry season. This other photo, we had an operation with a floating dock, and our kitchen sat up here 41 feet above the dock. That's where the high water was the following year, which flooded all our appliances. We've learned a lot about how to deal with these floods ever since that. If we look at a satellite photo of one of these complex tributaries, this is a dry season photo. This inset is simply a view of one of the sections, and it shows you the river channel moves through this complex floodplain structure where we have lakes and creeks and dike lakes and a whole variety of structure. This is where we fish, by the way. We don't really fish in the rivers in most cases. We fish this floodplain habitat. During the rainy season, this same area will look like this. The rising of the waters will make all the floodplain structure disappear. It will connect interfluvial marshes and literally create an environment where fishing is impossible. We'd be fishing in the forest. Instead of a 150-foot wide river, we may be looking at a 20-mile wide floodplain. So these things all conspire to create this great biodiversity. And this little map of the world, that darker color, shows you the highest biodiversity. The Amazon, with over 3,000 species of fish, and still counting, by the way. The second closest is the Mekong Basin with 700. If we look at all of North America, all of it, there are less than 300 species, less than a tenth of what's found in the Amazon itself. So if you stick your head under the water, this is what it looks like. Actually, I wish that were so. Fishing would be even easier than we try to make it. But this is a mural by Ray Troll. As fly fishermen, I'm sure many of you are familiar with his artwork. We took him to the Amazon going on 21 years ago now, and he was so taken with the place that he began adding Amazon species to his paintings. This mural sits in the Miami Museum of Natural History. But what it does point out is the great complexity and diversity of these fishes. There are over 3,000 species of fish in the Amazon and only 25,000 species of fish on the whole planet. That includes the oceans that make up 98% of all the world's waters. So 10% of all the fish species on Earth are found in the Amazon, and a third of all the world's freshwater fish. There are only 10,000 species of freshwater fish. So the Amazon's biodiversity is not simply different than other places. It is an entire order of magnitude different than anywhere else in the world, which makes it a lot of fun to fish in. So we'll talk a little bit about the fishes, and I hope I haven't bored you with the biology and geohistory, but the fishes are what makes the Amazon an exciting place. And among those 3,000 species of fish, the bulk of them consist of 4 dominant orders: Characiforms, we know them as characins; Siluriforms, catfish; Gymnotiforms, which are not of interest to anglers; and Perciforms. And we'll talk about each of these orders as we go forward here. But what's not found in the Amazon are Cypriniforms, carp, suckers. We don't have any of those types of fish, and they're the dominant order in North America. We have no Semoniforms, no trout, no salmon, and we have no Isociforms, no pike, no pickerel, no muskies. These orders of fishes were separated back 250 million years ago when the Pangea began to break up. But what we do have in the Amazon is a phenomenon known as convergence. So although, let me find my little pointer, we have no carp in the Amazon, we have Curimata, which is characin, that fills the same ecological niche. Downturned mouth, just like a carp, kind of a dome-shaped body like a carp, very similar in its behavior, and its form kind of adapts to that behavior. We have no trout, no salmon, but we have a whole bunch of bracons, including Dorado, Piraputanga, and a number of others, Matrincha, great game fish, and they behave like a trout. They react to the movement of water. Their feeding is based on their ability to minimize the expenditure of energy and maximize the benefit of the food. And finally, we have no pike, no muskie, but we have a whole range of fast start predators that feed in the same way. Sharp teeth, the ability to accelerate rapidly, and they cut and slash their way into bait fish, picking up the pieces as they finish. So they've converged on a similar behavior and a similar form. If we look at the trout and the Dorado, even down to the adipose fin, these fish are built very much the same, even though they are separated by 200 million years on the evolutionary tree. So with that being said, let me talk about some of these game fish. And I'm going to touch on the more famous ones. 3,000 species of fish. I know I move slowly through these seminars, but 3,000 species of fish we'd be hit on next week. Osteoglossiforms, they look primitive. They're kind of sort of primitive, but they're more modern than a tarpon, for example, or a ladyfish. They are not larval as a tarpon is, and they care for their young. Arapaima, you may have heard of as the world's largest scaled freshwater fish. They've been known to grow in excess of 12 feet long and in excess of 650 pounds. They're big, they look exciting, they're kind of wimpy for their size as a fighter, but of course something that big and you put a fly or a lure in its mouth and it will wake you up. Arapaima are obligatory air breathers. They must come up to breathe air. They must be in the water to exchange carbon dioxide. They have a modified swim bladder that acts in effect like a lung. So they gulp air. This has essentially led to their near demise. Very valued as a food fish. and aggressively hunted by commercial fishermen, arapaima give themselves away by surfacing. In Indian communities, a young man reached his adulthood by going out in a canoe with a harpoon and a gourd and patiently waiting for an arapaima to surface and then bringing it home to feed his village. Today, they're protected in the Amazon and they are not harvested in the wild any longer and are actually making a pretty good comeback. Similar in its biohistory is the arowana, although quite different in its behavior. Arowana is not an obligatory air breather. Like a tarpon, it uses air to augment its oxygen supply. So arowana, called the monkey fish by Indians because of its ability to leap high, it feeds in a different fashion. Arapaima sits on the bottom, sucking in shrimp and small fish. Arowana is an aggressive feeder, surface-oriented. They like to sit under overhanging bushes and wait for a bird to alight. If you look at that cargo door mouth, you can guess what happens when there's a bird within reach. Fun fish, especially on a fly rod. Clupeiforms are sardines. And of course, we are looking at a basin that was once a bay of the Pacific Ocean. So we have many species of sardines in the basin. But what's called Amazon pelona, or in Brazil, apapa, are really far and away the most exciting. These will exceed 17 pounds. They are an incredible fighting fish. And if I had the ability to locate them consistently, I would operate fishing trips just for these fish. Unfortunately, to this day, their movements are rather mysterious. I'll tell you a little story about them. We chartered our Amazon yacht to a group of Australians who came to Brazil to fish for arapaima. We got a permit to fish in Mamiroa, which is a large preserve in the western part of the basin. And we entered the reserve and we looked at those arapaima rolling all around us, but the reserve was full of shrimp at that season. And their preference was not to take a lure or a fly, but to sit on the bottom and inhale shrimp. I'm not a patient fisherman, so it didn't take me long to give up on that. And I took my manager out with me into the river that fed this, or that was adjacent to this reserve, the Juruá. And we went to see what we could catch. And that wasn't very productive either. So by lunchtime, we tied up on a sunken tree and in the shade and started to enjoy our lunch. And as we sat there, a wave began to move up the river. And waves typically don't move up a river, as you might imagine. And as it passed us, we realized it was millions, probably hundreds of millions of little silvery baitfish. And as soon as they passed us by, the water turned yellow with these apapa. And we quickly took out our gear and started throwing everything we had at them. We quickly discovered that a single hook works best. And so a fly rod was the tool of choice. And we had 3 days of crazy fishing. We brought the Australians out of the reserve and into the river, and we caught these things from morning to night all day long until they suddenly just disappeared. We ran 80 miles upriver hoping to catch up to them, never saw another one. Great fish, but unfortunately, we take them as they come. When they show up, we enjoy them. So that leads us to Carassiforms, one of the 4 main orders in the Amazon. And of course, I'm sure you've all heard of Dorado and Payara. Both are great fly rod adversaries, great adversaries on any tackle. And these are fish that grow, Dorado will grow well over 50 pounds, Payara almost to 40 pounds. A lot of fun to catch these fish. Carassiforms include over 1,200 of the Amazon's 3,000 species. And they have a phenomenon, or they exhibit a phenomenon essentially opposite to what we first talked about, convergence. Convergence where very different unrelated fishes looked and acted similarly because they enjoyed the same ecological niche. Here in radiation, we have fishes that separate within a region to take advantage of different niches. So the family Serrasalmidae, about 90 species, including, of course, the famous piranha and the pacu. Those of you who have aquaria, I'm sure know what pacu are, and Colosoma, a little less commonly known, but all members of the same family, Serrasalmidae. And if you look at these fish, simply looking at their profile, let's find my little laser pointer here, a piranha and a pacu and a pichinga, kind of shaped the same. What differentiates them is what they eat. Piranha, of course, are known for their sharp teeth, and they're primarily carrion and meat eaters, fin and scale stealers, famous for, unjustly so, by Hollywood, but piranha don't eat people. People eat piranha. But piranha have evolved to take advantage of that access to food, that part of the trophic chain. Pacu, on the other hand, have different dentition. They have a mouthful of molars, and they eat seeds and flowers for the most part. Similar fish in its form, very different in its behavior because of its diet. And finally, Colosoma, if there are any dentists in the audience, this might look like your worst patient, but they have a mouth like a human because they're omnivores. They have incisors and they have molars. They eat fruits, nuts, and fish when they can get it. So this is the phenomenon known as radiation, and it's happened in many families and has contributed dramatically to the explosion of aquatic biodiversity in the Amazon. Other well-known characiforms and hotly pursued game fish are wolffish. The pet trade, unfortunately, has given that name to everything in the family Erythrinidae, but the wolffish that anglers pursue, trairão in Brazil, is a fish that reaches nearly 40 pounds. They love taking flies, they love striking on the surface, and they have a mouthful of teeth, I don't know if you can see it here, that hidden by a fleshy shield that will put a piranha to shame. Payara, famous as a sport fish, and probably one of the more interesting fish in the Amazon. It has a very powerful strike. It strikes a bait and then it takes off running. A large payara will take 150 feet of line before it starts to jump. I've actually had clients on a river with me fishing for payara with a fly rod, and I set that client up at a little waterfall. Payara like to gather at the base and collect bait fish that can't make it up the falls. And I was fishing further down below when I saw a fly line drifting past. When I say down below, maybe a mile below. And I snagged it and pulled it in and began to bring it back in. And it, of course, was all backing and the fly line. And attached to it was a 15-pound payara that had actually spooled this angler because they're very good at using the current. Great sport fish. Other characiforms, other characins that we fish for are, I'll use my little pointer, piranha. Believe it or not, they get very big. We've caught them over 8.5 pounds. Pacu, pichinga, which is a colosoma. This is another species of pacu. Jacunda, which is a pike cichlid, and bicuda. Interesting fish. Siluriforms, catfish, consist of over 1,300 species in the Amazon, and they include some of the smallest and some of the largest. I'm probably going way over the time I'm supposed to, so I'm not going to dwell on the different species. Only suffice it to say I have a lot of stories about them that I won't get into tonight. Some of the biggest, including Jau and Piraiba. And in fact, at one time, Piraiba was the largest catfish ever caught on rod and reel. And this is a story I can't resist telling. I'll tell it quickly. I took an angler to a river on an exploratory trip, and his goal was to catch a giant Piraiba. Obviously, this was not caught on a fly rod. Chunking cut bait is difficult. But he spent 2 days until he finally hooked this thing. And he hooked it at 4 in the afternoon and landed it around 6:30 in the evening. Hence, it's dusk, I guess, in this picture. The fish was over 10 feet long. It weighed probably over 350 pounds. And I'll tell you why the record didn't show that. IGFA requires that fish be weighed on land. And of course, this angler and his guide were not going to pick that fish up and hold up a scale. So the guide climbed a tree on land and climbed out along a branch overhanging the water, hung a block and tackle from the branch. The angler had brought a fancy electronic scale with a cradle. They slipped the catfish into the cradle and began to lift the block and tackle. And as they lifted it, as the fish began to rise out of the water, the branch began to bend. So they never got the tail out of the water, but even with the tail in the water, the fish showed 295 pounds on the scale. So a 350-pound fish, which record was later broken actually, weighed in at 295 pounds. But at that time, it was the largest catfish ever caught on rod and reel. I can't help these stories. Forgive me. Gymnotiforms are not of interest to anglers. I mention them because they're a populous order. They're interesting and something to talk about at another time. They're of great interest to aquarists. Perciforms, which is where the superstars of the Amazon are found. And of course, that's the peacock bass. It has gained its reputation, honestly, as the world's most powerful freshwater sport fish. It is a cichlid. It is not a bass. And it is a fish that strikes for 2 reasons. Either because it perceives something to be food, or because it perceives something to be an intruder, a threat to its babies, or simply something that pissed them off. Interesting fish. They strike for food, they strike for anger. Until 2006, there were 5 recognized species of cichla, which is the genus for peacock bass. And quickly, after 2006, researchers quickly identified an additional 10 species. The last one was just ID'd this past March. Where's my little, there it is. And that's a new species out of Guyana. Peacocks that we may be familiar with are the ones in Florida, Cichla ocellaris, which was transplanted purposefully into Florida. Smaller fish, typically a good specimen is 5 pounds. Other well-known ones are what we in Brazil call the butterfly peacock, Cichla orinocensis, that has been transplanted into various warm water regions in Asia. Cichla monoculus, found in some of the Caribbean islands. I'm working on it. Cichla pliozona, which is in Lake Gatun. This was originally a Bolivian fish. The fish we pursue is Cichla temensis, the giant of the group, reaching almost 30 pounds in weight. Cichla temensis goes through a life cycle change on a yearly basis, and a detailed description of that is fodder for another talk. But essentially, they were previously known as the 3-bar because, of course, 3 bars, and were thought to be a separate species the speckled peacock because of the speckles. We were able to show in 2006, actually, that these were one and the same species. And by 2011, the Brazilian government accepted that and protected all of the morphs of the Cichlid timensis. So we now fish in protected regions only, where there is no commercial fishing. So how do you get there? I'm going to just take a couple of minutes to walk you through the trips we operate and give you a sense of the different kinds of water we can fish, the different ways we access them. So things are very different in different parts of the basin. We have very different types of water, from dead still placid water to violently raging rapids, and of course they contain different species. That varied terrain means we need different tools to get at these fish. So in the mid-Amazon lowlands, the blackwater systems that we fish are readily accessed by a mothership. Mothership is able to move quickly. It's able to stay in optimal fishing conditions, and it's able to be consistently productive. So of course, this is our mothership, Blackwater Explorer. It's an 11-year-old boat, very comfortable, private bathrooms in each cabin. Everything is air conditioned. We catch peacock bass and several other lowlands species on this trip. The shallow draft of the boat lets us get into small water and produce very consistently. Great food. It's a very comfortable, laid-back experience. And this is our most commonly selected trip by first-time visitors to the Amazon. It's easy, productive, and anglers are assured of great productivity. In addition to, we pride ourselves on first-class service. Things are a little bit different in tributaries and headwaters, and we use a different tool. We use a floating bungalow operation that's able to move through 12 inches of water. As a necessity, it's configured differently to allow us to do this. You're essentially looking at little Airstream trailers on hulls, and they're very comfortable, air-conditioned, private bathrooms, hot showers like in all of our operations. Because of their remoteness, they're accessed only by Cessna Caravan float plane that limits them to 8 anglers. We move them up and down the rivers and park them in the best spaces, best parts of the river for productivity. We catch a lot of big fish in the headwaters. Beautiful white sand beaches. This picture gives me a good opportunity to explain Blackwater. And not only that, but show off my great fishing daughter. My laser pointer here will show you that this shallow water at the edge of a beach up here in this shallow area is colored like a cup of tea because of the tannins, humic acid, and fulvic acids that stain this water. If we move to this corner where it's a little deeper, it begins to look black. It's why it's called Blackwater. Its pH ranges from about 3.5 to about 5.5. All of our temperate zone fish would roll up dead here. But it is the wonderful reason why we have no mosquitoes. We have catfish in these headwaters regions and excellent food, and like all of our operations, sort of a unique jungle elegance. So this is for guys who are looking for trophies. It does produce good numbers, not as consistently productive as a mothership, but a higher percentage of bigger fish. The highlands are not accessible by any of our mobile operations, so we've literally built a lodge on an island in the middle of a river, in the middle of an Indian reservation. And here we catch payara, a fast water species of peacock bass, Cichlid vazolari. We catch giant wolffish, bicuda, and a whole range of catfish. And believe it or not, the sotobim is one that will take a fly. The others, they're meat hunters. You chunk a piece of cut bait for them. Other fish we have are pacu, barbashata pescata, which is a drum. Again, another saltwater animal that has acclimatized to fresh water. Great food, great service. It's fancier than it has any right to be in the middle of nowhere. And it's very much an adventure in the Amazon. So this is about variety. It's not about high numbers. It's about all the different types of species you can encounter. And it's a very comfortable, rustic Amazon adventure experience. Finally, our last mechanism is a Blackwater Adventurer. And we've designed this to get into places we can't move any of our other operations into. It's built on a steel barge hull, drafts 16 inches of water, and we drag it through rocks and rapids to get it into high floodplains where we cannot access in any other mechanism. It's a unique mechanism. It has given us the new world's length record in peacock bass, and it's very comfortable and luxurious. Brand new. The photo you saw was before we even painted it. It was still in primer, but it's very luxurious. We have king-size couple suites with 2 bathrooms, and each of our private cabins has its own private bathroom. Very laid back, very comfortable, limited to 8 anglers. And it runs 2 seasons, one focused on giant peacocks and one focused on higher numbers in the Rio Negro Basin. So with that, I will thank you for your patience as I work my way through this. I realize I'm rather detail-oriented and perhaps a bit pedantic. And I think I need to turn over the screen back to Sandy. Let's see if I've done this right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes, I have. There you are.
Thank you, Paul. I learned a lot more than I knew an hour ago. I also want to mention before I pull up the poll that Acute Angling has opened a relief fund for the indigenous communities that they partner with. These tribes have been hit hard by COVID, not only the loss of funding from the fishing trips that aren't going to happen, but their community lifestyle and the inability to leave for supplies. So if you want to help this funding, 100% is going to go towards this effort. Find their link on the Acute Angling website. And so if there are questions, write your question and Paul can answer them, and I will pull up the poll. There we go. Can everybody see it?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. I'm also going to give, Patty wrote a note. Women Connect is running a women's trip, September 19th through 26th on the big boat that you saw in 2022. And you can find out more about that in the FFI Women Connect Facebook page. It's limited to 16. So we'll be talking more about that, and we will we'll have Paul give us a few more lectures on fishing and how to fish it. And so stay tuned. All right. And that, thanks again. Still getting some polls.
Well, while we're doing that, Sandy, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to your membership. I usually do these seminars in person so I can look at my audience and I can tell if I'm putting them to sleep because you can see the snoozers. And of course, here on a webinar, that's kind of impossible. So to all of you who had the patience to listen to this presentation, I thank you, and I apologize if I put any of you to sleep, but I get no feedback. So this is all a one-way one direction trip for me.
And Paul can tell you 2 minutes before the webinar, I lost internet.
It was a bit of an emergency, wasn't it?
And I'm like, and I'm the host and the moderator, so I was a bit frantic to start with, and so I'm pleased that we didn't have as many hiccups as we did. Zoom is a learning curve for everyone, so I thank everyone for your patience. We do have a couple questions.
Yep.
Paul, what's the latest on the conservation concerns regarding the Amazon rainforest basin?
Well,
From Terry.
I will, first of all, characterize it in two ways. The Amazon basin is a gigantic place. The regions we fish, the central Amazon basin, have this huge flood pulse. It's not a good place to set up a cattle ranch because unless you've got swimming cows, it's not a good place to build structures, even bridges. The first bridge ever built in the central Amazon basin was recently built in Manaus, and it is absolutely a marvel of engineering and built in the only place they could get away with it. So what we hear about the Amazon being diminished is happening in its fringes. It's happening in the southern part of Brazil where the Trans-Amazon Highway approaches the edges of the basin. If you have a highway, people will drive down it. Brazil in the past had several poorly thought out laws, and people were able to squat, take title to land, burn it down, turn it into cattle ranches and savanna land instead of primary forest. This has happened at the edges. It doesn't happen in the central basin. So the regions where we fish are essentially remain untouched. They're not places where settlement in any great scale is practical. They're still primarily populated by Indian communities, the central basin, and much of this middle to upper Rio Negro is surrounded entirely by reservations. The reservations that we see being attacked are outside of the basin for the most part in the state of Pará, where there's great mineral wealth. And I guess what I'm trying to say is terrible damage is happening at the edges of the basin, but very little impact occurs in the central basin. Sorry for that long-winded explanation.
And then the others are, Alan says, very nice, no sleeping. We had somebody who had problems sending in the poll. Thank you very much. It was very easy to understand. The maps and pictures were welcome. We hope you get to do this again. Wonderful and informative. You've got a lot of new fans, Paul.
Well, great, thank you. I appreciate that. You've made my day.
All right. Thank you again, everybody. Did we answer all the questions?
There was one question from earlier, Paul, that I answered, but you might be able to do it a little more clearly and informative. Anthony Hips asked, including airfare, how much do these trips cost on average?
They range in price from $48.50. They're roughly $5,000 for the trip. Airfare is a function of where you are. It's awfully cheap right now, but of course we won't be fishing until November due to the effects of COVID. Airfare ranges from about $800 to about $1,800. Our trips are all inclusive, so there are no extra charges. Food, drink, open bar, laundry, booze, conventional rods, reels, lines, lures. We even include travel insurance and global rescue. So those are really your costs unless you choose to buy a beer in the airport, which could cost a fortune.
If you want to give your address again, the last question from Mark is there a way to reach you with additional questions?
Yes, webmaster at acuteangling.com. I probably should have left that last page up, but I hope that's clear. Webmaster acuteangling.com. You can send me any questions you like, and I'll be happy to get back to you.
And this presentation was recorded. And so if you know of people that are interested in this, you can go to the Fly Fishers International homepage and you can watch the recording of this. Thank you again, everybody, for coming.